Welcome to our recording for today. Hope you guys are having a good day. We are going to recap a little bit of yesterday's lesson and then dive into the rest of the content that we did not get to finish yesterday because you guys were so good at participating in the discussion. So let me scroll up here. You may recall for the bell activity, we introduced the unit by going over figures of speech and identifying all the possible figures of speech we could find in this image. We even found some that weren't listed on the answer key. The objective here in this unit is to identify the use of figures of speech in text. Some of that includes imagery, some of it's like actual figurative language that's not literal. Remember, figurative and literal are the opposite. And some of it's determining connotations and nuances of words. Most of this is review. We went over it last semester. And we talked about how a figure of speech is a phrase or expression whose meaning is not the same as the literal meanings of its words. So for example, to kick the bucket does not literally mean to kick a bucket. It means to die, right? But it's a more expressive way of saying that. And it to say kick the bucket conveys a much different meaning than pass away or die or any other way to say that somebody died. So you get the idea. Expressive language helps with tone, with emotion, and it's the way that we convey writing in the way that we want to say something. So with that in mind, we went over some examples of figures of speech, hyperbole, metaphor. We didn't go over metaphor, but it is an example of figures of a figure of speech. We went over hyperboles and understatements, which are two opposites. Hyperbole is an exaggeration, and an understatement is the opposite, right? Saying less than what you should say to make a point. So keeping that in mind, we'll skip ahead to what we did not cover yesterday. If you'd like to go over some examples of hyperbole and understatements, here's the list we went over. And then we also did an activity where I let you choose level 1, 2, 3, or 4 for the exit ticket to write a response. So if you missed that, make sure you go back and do it. I have a similar activity for today with various levels. We're going to go over now the use of words in writing, the connotation and the denotation and nuances. Again, this is review. Denotation is the dictionary definition of a word. Connotation is more like the feeling or the mental picture created by the word. And the nuance is a slight difference in the meaning of words. So the denotation, connotation, and nuance all give you a slightly different version of a word than you might otherwise get, depending on how the author writes it. So keeping that in mind, when an author is writing, they're going to choose their words very specifically with the literal definition, the denotation in mind, the connotation of what it's going to imply in mind, and then the nuance of how that affects the tone. So keeping that in mind, authors pay very specific attention to imagery. The images that are, or sensations that are created with the words that they choose. If you are writing something that you want to be descriptive, you're going to want to address sight, smell, taste, and sound, sensory details, right? If you only address one of these, like sound, for example, you're not going to give your reader the full picture of what's happening. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes you want to withhold some information to, skew what they see intentionally. But for the most part, you're going to want to address several senses to get the full image in the reader's mind, not just for narrative language, but also for argumentative and informative too. So imagery is definitely part of figure of speech. Imagery creates a mood. So let's go back to the piece that we read a bit of last time, the spider and the fly. We're taking this in chunks. We've got, alas, alas, how very soon this silly little fly, hearing his wily flattering words came slowly flitting by. You remember yesterday the fly was trying to flatter, or the spider was trying to flatter the fly by saying the fly was prettier than him. So the fly comes flying back. With buzzing wings, she hung aloft, then nearer and nearer drew, thinking only of her brilliant eyes and green and purple hue, thinking only of her crested head. Poor foolish thing, at last she jumped the cunning spider and fiercely held her fast. Or at last up jumped the cunning spider and fiercely held her fast. He dragged her up his winding stair into his dismal den within his little parlor, but she'll ne'er come out again. Dun, dun, dun. So we see, the imagery here, the words like buzzing and flitting give us, buzzing is like that sound. We can hear it. And flitting, you can hear the sound of the wings as well. Whereas if you were to say flying, it wouldn't necessarily give us that same image of the fly. And we get the colors green and purple, so we're seeing that as well. And so we have at least two senses addressed here. Okay, so I want you to pause the video here or in the Nearpod, if you're on that slide, take a look at the 4 different levels we have here. If you're not feeling super confident, try level 1. If you're feeling way confident, try level 4. If you're somewhere in between, pick 2 or 3. Or if you're feeling up for it, pick more than one to respond to. Level 1 is to explain imagery and give at least one example of imagery using one of the 5 senses. Level 2 is to classify each example of imagery to its matching sense. So I give you some examples of imagery there, and I want you to tell me what sense is being addressed. I'll give you a hint on the first one. The example is the silence in the room was unnerving. It is addressing hearing or lack of hearing through the silence, right? So identify the other senses that are being addressed in the other bullet points on level 2. For level 3, I want you to compare imagery and hyperbole and the possible effects of each on the reader. So you have to remember what hyperbole was yesterday. It's exaggerations, right? So compare or contrast to how they're similar and how they're different. And write me a paragraph about those and how they might affect the reader. Or if you're feeling up for it, if you want to go for level 4, analyze the imagery and other figurative language in the lines below. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So you're analyzing what imagery there is in that piece and what other figurative language is used below. So you may have to dust off some cobwebs to remember what figurative language is, but I know you can do it. So whichever level you're feeling comfortable with, pause this video or stop where you are in the Nearpod and write your response. When you're ready, move on. These are the words that you will need to know for this unit. We've got some vocabulary here. We've talked about imagery today. We've covered hyperbole a little bit today, but definitely did yesterday. Word choice, connotation, nuance, and understatement. All of these we've covered in either today or yesterday. So take a minute to recap, to the internet, to your brain, wherever you need to go to refresh your memory on what these mean and to clarify if you're unsure. You can certainly Google them if you'd like, or you can go back in this lesson or go back in yesterday's lesson and double check, make sure you know what they are. I'm going to include these test your skill moments slides in the Nearpod to give you a chance to see where you're at. If you're feeling like you can do these bits of analysis, please do. If you're confused, try your best. And then in the exit ticket, make sure you tell me where you were confused so I can help you clarify when we have live class. This one is another example from The Spider and the Fly. And you just get to analyze the example of hyperbole from this poem. So where is that exaggeration? We've got another example from The Spider and the Fly here with 2 questions. Which poems or lines in the poem are an example of imagery? And you're supposed to select. Whenever there's a checkbox like this, there's more than one right answer. When there's a circle, like a radio button it's called, there's just the one right answer. So this question is, which option most accurately describes the mood created by the imagery in the excerpt? Probably not soothing, but maybe. Depending on if you're the spider or the fly, right? Tense, joyful, and sorrowful, those are all the options for mood. So read through the excerpt a second time if you need to after having answered the first question here, and see what you feel like the tone is. Testing your skills again. We've got another example here, not from the spider and the fly. Alice was acting in a juvenile way at work. She threw a fit when the company manager told her she needed to make a few revisions to her report. Which option best describes the connotative meaning of the underlined word? So while juvenile means young, she was it could be youthful, but the way, if you're acting that way at work, if you're at work, you're at least 16 or older, so you should be mature, right? So not youthful may not be the right connotation here, even though the word juvenile does translate to youthful. It is a synonym. Childish would be the connotation here because we've got also the phrase she threw a fit, which children do. And so the word juvenile is supported by that idea of throwing a fit, which is childish. And that's the connotative instead of the literal meaning of the word or the denotative meaning. Here we have another question. The sun's rays were intense enough to burn the skin even though it was still spring. Lifeguards warned tourists to take extra precautions to protect themselves when swimming and sunning. And you should, the question here is, which word most effectively replaces the word burn to convey the most negative meaning? Do we want sear, tan, warm, or toast? So a good way to check this, if you're looking for a negative meaning, or really any different meaning, replace the word burn in the sentence with the option here. So if you were to say the sun's rays were intense enough to sear the skin, or to tan the skin, to warm the skin, to toast the skin. Warming and toasting are probably more positive, right? Tanning could go either way, but tanning is definitely not the most negative, right? Searing is the most negative. So if you replace it with the word burn in the sentence, you can see, that is the most negative. Okay, that's the answer. So hopefully that helps you understand connotative versus denotative, and how words might have the same definition, but they connotate things differently, or they add a different tone to the piece. So there you have it. That is our very brief lesson for today. Tomorrow we will start covering the Mask of the Red Death, which is eerily relevant to our current world situation. I did not plan that when I, had this course assigned to me at the beginning of the year. It just happened to fall this way. But do take the time to read that before class tomorrow. We'll go over parts of it in class, but if you come prepared having read it, you'll be in good shape. See you then.